Good morning, everyone.
Good
morning. It's a privilege to start the second day of the Cormoran Conference with sharing Rystad Energy's view on the future energy and shipping markets. For those of you that don't know us, Rystad Energy is an independent advisory, research and business intelligence company. And as the company name is kind of stating, we're looking at energy. So in that we try to cover the entire energy system, meaning oil and gas, hydrogen, geothermal, wind, etc., etc. Since when you want to look at the transition in shipping, you can't do that in isolation. You need to have a view on the future energy mix for the trade flow perspective, but also to get a view on the availability of alternative fuels and what the price of the alternative fuels can be, as they will be important in order to decarbonize the hard-to-abate sectors like shipping. So I will start out with showing how we in Rystad Energy is looking at the energy system. So this chart is then describing the entire energy system, where you have the primary energy sources to the, for me, on the left-hand side here, so solar, wind, hydro, bio, nuclear, natural gas, oil, coal, etc. And then this is being moved and put into where we make the molecules, so the refineries, which is the third column here. And then these molecules are then brought into the power plants, which is the fourth column, where you produce all the electrons that you need. That is then transported and put in for the end user segments, which is buildings, transport, and industry. And the future can play out in many different scenarios. We have been looking at everything from a 2.5 degree scenario all the way down to what we see as the most aggressive transition scenario is a 1.4. The Paris Agreement is a 1.5. But since the IMO revised their GHG strategy in July, this aligns quite well with a 1.6 degree scenario. So I will show a slide on that later in the presentation. So this is the current energy system, and it's heavily fossil-based. 85 to 90% of the total energy used over several decades has been fossil fuel, so gas, oil, and coal. The kind of the end state and the goal for the energy transition will be a new energy system that is no longer based on fossil fuels, but is based on renewable electricity. So then you will move from this system over to this system, which is mainly having primary resources as solar, wind, hydro, geothermal, and biomass. And this energy system has zero emissions associated with it, meaning that it's a clean energy system without all the GHG emissions. How long this will take is, of course, a big uncertainty, and that's why we have all the scenarios. But let's switch to the next one here. This is then showing from the 1800s all the way to 2100, the energy mix, the historical one, and the future one, and this is in a 1.6 degree scenario. So quite aggressive transition to renewables. There's still, in 2050, there's still a share of oil and gas in the energy mix, also in the 1.6 degree scenario. But what is important here is that over the last 10 years, 75% of all the investments has gone into fossil energy. If you want to reach a 1.6 degree scenario, the capital allocation needs to be changed quite dramatically. So we need to put 70% into renewable energy to meet this scenario. But renewable energy is already one of the most competitive energy sources that we have. Examples are, for example, the large solar projects in the Middle East, where the levelized cost of electricity can be as low as $13 per megawatt hour, meaning that if you take an electric vehicle and charge it, for example, at the Al Dhafra project in Dubai, you can travel 500 kilometers for only $1.3 US. So just saying something about the competitiveness of solar PVs. Another aspect of this system is that, as we already kind of mentioned, it will be clean. But another thing that is quite important, especially for the shipping markets, is that it will also be a lean energy system. And what do I mean about lean? Here's just two examples. One is to the first picture here is a typical parking space in China with solar panels. This is about 30 tons of infrastructure, solar panels, that can charge the cars here with all the electricity they need. And over a 15-year period, which is basically the life span of a car, then you can replace 40,000 barrels of oil or diesel. Another picture here is an office building not too far from our headquarters in Oslo, where 10 tons of solar panels, around 100 panels, that last for 25 years. This can replace around 8,000 tons of coal that would be needed to make the same electricity that this house or this office building would need. So as you can see, moving over to a clean energy system and using more direct electricity is also lean. So more local energy production. So more local energy production and also a more efficient system. So in the current fossil fuel system, there's a lot of, around 2/3 of the energy goes to heat loss. So for a coal-fired power plant, for example, you put 100% in and then you get 30% out in electricity. So it's a massive heat loss. This will not happen when you have a renewable electricity system. And this obviously will have a big impact on shipping. Not saying that it will happen in 2050, but over time, you will see a big difference in the shipping market because around 40% of the current shipping is energy related. And you won't need all of this transport of oil, gas, coal in the kind of a new system. So obviously this will have a significant impact. And if we look at this 1.6-degree scenario towards 2050, we actually see that in terms of ton miles, you could see almost a 30% reduction for ton miles of energy shipping, which is quite significant. But of course, the transition can take longer than 1.6 in 2050. I mean, there's a lot of hurdles that needs to be overcome, the capacity of electricity grid, energy storage, all the things. But at some point, this will happen. But there's also opportunities in the transition. There will be more ammonia and methanol transport, and will also be new shipping segments, like the transport of CO2. We are seeing quite a lot of influx of projects where you will use, where there's been indications or announcement that you will use ship as transportation. So we have a CCS team that is covering all the CCS projects. They're looking at the capacity, at least the capacity they want to capture. Where are the terminals? Where should the CO2 be stored? And the distance between the terminals to the offshore storage location or onshore storage location. And mapping all of this up, then you get the trade flow on these projects that you can see here. And adding all this up is around 19 million tons per year. If you then assume average vessel size of 25,000 cubic meters, then this will be around 55 vessels by 2030 and more than 80 vessels by 2035. Again, another market that are facing some technology issues, and this can be delayed, but at least based on the kind of the known projects that we have in the pipeline, this is around where we see it. And a lot of it is North Sea focused, and as the technology develops, you can see more long distance routes, Saudi Arabia, Australia, Malaysia, Japan. The alternative fuel backlog, or the backlog, I think was very well covered by Clarkson's yesterday, but just to kind of summarize a little bit, LNG is the most ordered kind of alternative fuel in the order book. Then we are seeing that methanol is increasing as the most popular alternative fuels. Here we have included everything that is both dual fuel and also ready. So just to highlight that in this selection, I think we have around 150 dual fuel methanol vessels in this selection here. Ammonia, it's pretty much only different degrees of readiness to use ammonia. But we kind of see that methanol and ammonia are the two most popular choices. And then if you have an LPG vessel, it makes sense to use LPG. But companies are still kind of hedging for the future. So a lot of these vessels are dual fuel LNG, and then they also are ammonia, methanol ready. So there's a lot of uncertainty what will be the future fuel and the availability. But there are shipping companies that are taking action already. Shipping companies are used to basically global availability of marine gas oil and very low sulfur oil, so you can buy most of it in the spot market. But in order to be able to get alternative fuels, at least now in the upcoming years, it is important that shipping companies are willing to make long-term offtake agreements in order to secure alternative fuels. This is not a complete list, but it's a good selection of the ones that we know about. Most of it is related to methanol, either e-methanol or biomethanol, and Maersk is, as many people know, kind of one of the front runners here with both firm fuel agreements and then partnership, letter of intent, and then some of these are also MOUs. So it's a little bit of a mix. And the whole market for now is to a large extent characterized by non-binding agreements where you don't quite know what the offtake agreement will be in these contracts. But yeah, on the ammonia side, which is much more immature fuel, then maybe we can highlight Höegh Autoliners, which is much closer to kind of a firm fuel agreement with North Ammonia, and they want to use around 5% of their future fuel mix should be e-methanol. So that's more of a, it's still a partnership, but a much more firm agreement. One thing I also wanted to highlight is that a company like Maersk has also invested directly into fuel producers, C2X. It's not something that you're used to seeing a shipping company do, but it's much more common in other industries. So for hydrogen, you are quite used to seeing that the off-taker also has a stake in the project. So this could be a trend that we also will see on the shipping side, where some of these larger shipping companies also invest in the fuel production and becoming stakeholders. Then this is our kind of take on trying to forecast and give a view on the prices for alternative fuels. I'm going to focus on e-ammonia and e-methanol in this case and comparing it with very low sulfur oil. You can't really buy e-methanol or e-ammonia in the current market, so it's a kind of a cost-based model where we try to figure out what the price can be for e-methanol and e-ammonia. There's a lot of assumptions that goes into this forecasting, but what you are seeing here is apples-to-apples comparisons. So we're taking the density into account of these fuels. So if you see the price of ammonia today, you need to multiply it with around 2.2 to kind of get in the fuel oil equivalent, which is what you see here. And now this is a price difference between very low sulfur oil and ammonia and e-methanol is around 4 times the price, more than 4 times the price. But there's many different ways you can look at this. This is without any regulations and incentives, so I can run through some scenarios for you on the next couple of slides. I just want to highlight one thing before we go into that, and that is there's a lot of talk about EU, at least in the EU fuel maritime. So if you use 1 ton of fuel, you emit 3 tons of CO2, and if the ETS price is 100, then it's additional cost of 300 USD on the fuel you're paying. But the main kind of regulation that is in place that will have a big impact on shipping is the Fuel EU Maritime, with the GHG intensity target that you need to meet, and that will get more and more stricter over time, as 80% much more strict towards 2050, and you need to pay the difference between the fuel you're using and the standard if you're not meeting it, and then it's quite a high penalty. So this is the kind of the main regulation that will move towards more using clean fuels in the EU, and then we'll see what the IMO will be doing going forward. But if you take the Fuel EU Maritime into account, so if you're looking at a voyage between 2 European ports and also assuming EU ETS of $100, you see that in 2045, that's when e-ammonia and e-methanol in our projections will be price competitive with LNG and conventional fuel. And the reason why you see this stepwise price increase in LNG and conventional fuel is mainly driven by the Fuel EU Maritime. Then you won't reach the GHG target, you have to pay a high penalty. and it goes up over time. Of course, for LNG here, you can blend in bio-LNG to meet the target and things like this. So there's a lot of things you can do around this to meet the target. But for the kind of pure LNG and conventional fuel, this is kind of how we see the picture. But there's even more that you can add into the model. One thing is there is quite big production incentives now within the EU and also with the IRA in the US. So this slide here is then showing them the maximum support that you can get for hydrogen production on the OPEC side in the EU, which is $4.9 per kilogram of hydrogen, of green hydrogen, which is 1.5 times more than the maximum you can get in the US. And then if you get this maximum EU incentives, then you see that you can basically push forward the price competitiveness quite significantly. E-ammonia is here 2035, e-methanol 2040. So it's like 5 years at least that you can push this forward. And we can run the same scenarios also for the US, but this shows kind of the impact of production incentives for the price of e-fuels. Of course, not all projects will get them the maximum incentives. Our analysis saying that in the EU, around 17,700 tons of green hydrogen will get the benefit from the European Hydrogen Bank. So it's not all projects that will get it, but for those that get the maximum, this can be the outcome. We have a tool for this, so if there's someone that are interested in looking at different scenarios and playing around with some of these input parameters, then you can reach out afterwards and I can show you if you're interested. But that was my last slide, so thank you for your time.